Montana Territory, November 1872. The snow was falling hard when Marabeth Dorsey stumbled into the open, her shoes torn through and her arms wrapped tight around her shivering daughter. Her breath came in hoarse clouds. She could not feel her fingers anymore. The wind bit through her threadbare shawl and little Delia whimpered against her chest. Just a little farther, Marabeth whispered, though there was no proof of that. Her husband had died 2 weeks ago, taken by fever he never woke from, and the man who promised to take her and Delia to his brother's ranch had driven them in a wagon for 3 days, then left them in a gully with a sack of flour and a blanket. He never came back. Marabeth had waited 2 days, rationing the flour, melting snow to drink, hoping. Then Delia's lips turned blue and she knew they would die if they did not walk. Now she was walking toward nothing. Until she saw smoke. It curled up through the trees ahead, faint at first, then thicker. She almost thought it a trick of her frozen mind. But Delia stirred, blinking through her lashes. "I see it, Mama." Marabeth pushed forward, every step aching. Her legs buckled once her knees hitting rock, but she pulled herself up. She could not let Delia go. She would crawl if she had to. The cabin was tucked in the trees, low and rough-hewn, with a corral beside it and a dark horse watching them approach. The door creaked open before she reached it. A man stood in the doorway, rifle in hand. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark coat dusted with snow. His jaw was sharp, his eyes deep-set and wary beneath the brim of his hat. Marabeth froze. He lowered the rifle slowly. "You lost." She could not answer. Her lips barely worked. She took one more step and crumpled into the snow. When she woke, she was warm. The fire cracked near her feet. She was wrapped in thick wool. She reached out fast. "Delia?" "I am right here, Mama." Delia's small voice came from the edge of the bedroll beside her. Marabeth turned her head. Her daughter was bundled in a thick buffalo hide. Cheeks flushed warm now, eyes clear. The man was by the fire, stirring something in a pot. He looked over, his voice quiet. "You were near froze. I got your boots off, rubbed your hands. You were lucky your fingers are still pink." Marabeth tried to sit up, but her body ached too much. "I am sorry," she whispered. "We did not mean to trespass." "I thought," her voice cracked. "We were left to die." The man did not say anything for a long time. Then he set the spoon down and crossed the room. "My name is Yates Alder," he said, crouching beside her. "You are not trespassing. And you are not dying." "Not now." She looked at him closely then. His face had the look of a man who had seen too much and said little about it. There was a scar high on his cheekbone, a pale line beneath his right eye. His coat was patched, his knuckles rough. "I am Marabeth Dorsey," she said. "This is Delia. She is 7. Delia peeked out of the hide and offered a quiet, "Hello." Yates gave her a nod. "You hungry, little one?" Delia nodded. "I got stew," he said. "A little tough, but warm." He brought them bowls, and Marabeth tasted it, closing her eyes at the heat. She had not eaten anything but snow and dry flour in 3 days. Yates sat by the fire again, watching them. "Tell me what happened." Marabeth told him. Her voice stayed steady until she got to the part where she had to leave her husband buried under a cairn of stones by a frozen stream. Then her hand trembled around the spoon. Yates did not interrupt her, and he did not look away. When she finished, he just said, "You stay here as long as you need." She blinked. "You do not even know us." "I know enough," he said, and stood. "You and the girl need rest. We can talk more when the storm lets up." That night, Marabeth lay beneath the thick covers, Delia curled close to her side. The wind howled outside, but inside was calm. The firelight danced on the walls, and Yates sat in the rocking chair sharpening a knife, quiet, steady, present. She watched him until her eyes closed. Over the next few days, snow piled high against the cabin walls. Yates brought in more wood, cooked meals, and showed Delia how to feed the horses. He did not ask questions he did not need to. He gave them space without making them feel like guests. Marabeth found herself watching him more than she meant to. The way he moved with quiet purpose, how he listened when Delia chattered even when he pretended not to smile at her stories. One afternoon, Marabeth stepped outside to hang wet linens near the stovepipe. The snow had stopped. Yates was chopping wood out back. His coat was off, sleeves rolled, and steam rose from his shoulders. She watched the swing of his axe, the rhythm of it. There was a steadiness in him, a kind of quiet strength she had not known in a long time. He caught her watching. Their eyes met. He did not look away. That night, she helped him peel potatoes. Delia was asleep already. The lantern light glowed soft between them. "You live out here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Past 5 years now." "Why?" He looked down at the peels. "War ended. I did not want to go back to what I was. So I came here, built this cabin with my own hands. Grew quiet." Marabeth nodded. "Quiet can be good." He looked at her then. "But not always." She looked away. Her heart was beating too fast. For days later, the snow began to melt. Yates saddled his horse and rode to the nearest town, 20 miles out, for supplies. He came back with flour, sugar, dried apples, and a doll for Delia. When he handed it to her, she gasped. "She has a blue dress." "She told me her favorite color," Yates said, glancing at Marabeth. That night, Delia curled up with the doll, and Marabeth sat near the fire, her hands folded in her lap. "You are a good man, Yates." He looked over. "I am just doing what is right." "No," she said softly. "You are doing more than that." He was quiet, then said, "You do not have to leave, Marabeth." She turned toward him. "I mean it," he said. "You and Delia. You could stay here. You would be safe. Warm. I built this place for one, but it is better with 3. Her throat tightened. "You do not even know if I know you are strong. I know you love your daughter something fierce. And I know you make this cabin feel like something I forgot I missed." She stepped closer. Her voice shook. "I thought I was done with love. I thought I was done hoping." He reached for her hand, took it gently in his. "You are not done." She looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that made her knees weak. Something real, steady. She stepped into his arms, and he held her like she mattered, like she was already home. The days folded into one another with the quiet rhythm of winter softening its grip. The land around the cabin held a pale hush, snow retreating from the southern slope and leaving behind patches of brown grass and stone. Inside, warmth clung close, the hearth burned slow, the scent of pine smoke settled into wool, and the air carried the faint sound of Delia humming as she carved with her new whittling stick. Yates leaned over the table, smoothing a scrap of hide flat to mark out a new harness strap. Marabeth sat across from him, mending one of Delia's stockings with tight, practiced stitches. Neither spoke for a long while, yet nothing felt missing in the silence. Marabeth rested her needle, letting her eyes drift to Yates's hands. "You were careful about that hide," she said. "Most men would have cut before thinking." "I learned not to waste," he replied without looking up. "My uncle used to call me slow-handed. Meant it as a jab. I took it as a lesson." "Was he the one raised you?" "For a while. After my father died. My mother couldn't hold the farm alone, so she sent me east to stay with kin. I came back when I was grown." She watched the movement of his fingers as he tied off a line of stitches. "You ever think of leaving this place? Trying for town again?" He looked out the window where the pines stood stark against the cliffs. "I tried once. Lasted 2 weeks. Couldn't sleep with all the noise. Couldn't breathe right with that many people close around. I need space. Quiet. Something solid under me." Marabeth nodded. "I understand that." She didn't speak of how the town she'd come from had turned its face after her husband's death, how help had been offered with pity but never consistency. How a woman alone with a child slowly disappeared from folks' minds. Later, while Delia napped with her new doll tucked against her cheek, Marabeth stepped out to the lean-to where Yates was working on the tack. The sky was pale, almost golden at the edges, and a few chickadees flitted between the fence rails. "I've been thinking," she said, folding her arms against the cold. "About spring." He paused, his hand on the worn leather. "What about it?" "I'd planned to go south. Maybe try for Helena. Find sewing work. A room to rent. But I don't know anymore. Delia. She's steadier here than she's been in months." He turned toward her. "You wouldn't have to travel that road. Not unless you want to." "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I only just remembered how to breathe again. That's enough for now." She looked up at him then, his face half-shadowed under the overhang. There was no urgency in his voice, no persuasion. Only a patient kind of waiting. That evening, Delia watched as Yates shaved curls of birch bark for the fire starter. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked. He nodded once. "Sometimes. Not with us here, though?" she asked, tilting her head. He met her eyes. "No. Not with you here?" Marabeth, listening from the table, felt something settle in her chest. Not soft, not fragile, something rooted. The next morning, she rose early and stepped outside before the sun crested the ridge. The ground was damp beneath her boots, thaw pulling yesterday's ice into mud. She found Yates near the corral, brushing down the mare. "I've decided something," she said, stopping a few paces away. He looked up. "I'm not going to Helena." He waited. "I want to stay," she said, "if that's still offered." He set the brush aside and wiped his hands on a cloth. "It is." Her breath clouded in the cold and then cleared. "Then I will." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Not just because it's safer?" "No," she said, "because it's right." He reached out, then not sudden, not unsure, and took her hand. The warmth of it ran through her like fire through dry wood. Inside the cabin, Delia's voice rose in a song she was making up, her notes rising and falling like the wind. The sun touched the roofline, and a new day opened wide before them. By late March, the river thawed. A slow, winding stream of meltwater slid between the banks, carrying twigs and winter's cast-off bark down toward the low flats. The trees budded with pale green at their tips, and patches of bluebell pushed up beside the cabin, stubborn and bright. Yates had begun clearing the lower field for planting. Delia followed him with a tin pail, collecting small stones unearthed by the frost. Marabeth stood at the edge of the clearing, sleeves rolled to her elbows, dragging aside deadfall with a hooked branch. "You're certain this spot holds enough sun?" she asked, brushing hair from her brow. Yates glanced up from where he knelt beside the furrows. "Come midsummer, this stretch'll bake. Soil's decent too. Creek's close enough for hauling." She nodded once and turned back to her work. That night, after Delia had fallen asleep with dirt still under her nails, Yates leaned against the doorframe, watching the last of the dusk settle beyond the hills. Marabeth joined him, her shawl pulled tight. "You ever plant before?" he asked without turning. "Once," she said. "We had a patch of squash and beans behind the boarding house when I was a girl. My mother said it was the only thing she could grow better than the landlord's wife." He chuckled under his breath. "Smart woman." "She was," Marabeth said. "Hard too. But she never stayed hard where it counted." They stood quietly for a time. The sky deepened from lavender to ink. A pair of owls called across the timberline. "I've been thinking about schooling," she said finally. "Delia's sharp and she's behind. I taught her letters and numbers after supper when I could, but she's hungry for more." He shifted, arms crossing his chest. "There's a traveling teacher comes through from the mission school near Fort Benton. Usually stays a few weeks. I let him sleep in the hayloft once." She looked over at him. "Would he come again if asked?" "I expect so." "I'd like that," she said. "And I could help. I learned enough from books to teach little ones." He nodded. "We'd build a bench. Clear space by that east window. Light's good there." The next morning, Marabeth rose before sunup and kneaded cornmeal into cakes by the hearth. She moved with quiet purpose, tying her hair back with one of the strips she'd sewn from an old petticoat. Yates came in from feeding the stock and paused when he saw her. "You always move like you've already made up your mind," he said, brushing snowmelt from his coat. "I have," she replied. "This place, we can make it something steady. Not just safe, but whole." He stepped closer, brushing a fleck of flour from her cheek with the side of his finger. "You've changed this place without trying." He didn't say more, but she felt the weight of it settle soft between them. Later that day, Yates harnessed the wagon. "I'll ride into town. Leave word for that teacher." Marabeth handed him a parcel wrapped in cloth. "Take these too. I mended them for the shopkeep's wife last week. She'll trade them for thread." Delia ran out barefoot, her braids flying, and pressed a folded drawing into Yates's hand. "For the teacher," she said. "So he knows I'm ready." Yates tucked it into his coat without unfolding it. He'll know. He returned 2 days later with the teacher's agreement and a small sack of barley seed. She wouldn't take the trade, he said, setting the bundle on the table. Said your stitching was too fine to be bartered. Marabeth smiled, but her eyes stayed on the sack. We'll need more rows cleared. Then we clear them. That evening, Marabeth stepped outside alone. The land stretched quiet, save for the wind moving through the pines and the soft rush of water beyond the ridge. She stood for a long time, watching the last light settle over the field where rows of turned earth waited for seed. Yates joined her without speaking. When she turned toward him, her hand found his. No hesitation, no question. Only the warm solidity of fingers lacing together, the shape of something lasting. Behind them, the cabin glowed golden through the window, and the sound of Delia's humming drifted faintly into the dusk. The teacher arrived in early April, a lean man with stiff shoulders and a pair of wire spectacles that never quite sat straight. He stayed in the loft, as promised, and by his second day had Delia reading aloud from a battered primer while Marabeth stood by the stove, listening with quiet pride. Yates spent more time out past the tree line, clearing brush and marking boundary lines while the ground still gave beneath the shovel. He didn't say much about it, but Marabeth noticed the way he walked the fence line each evening with a measuring rope in hand, his expression drawn in thought. One morning, with the sun already high and the field half-plowed, Marabeth crossed to where he worked, her apron tucked up to keep the hems clean. She brought him a tin cup of cool creek water and waited while he straightened from the plow harness. There's more land here than one man needs, she said, brushing hair from her cheek. He took the cup, drank deep, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I've been thinking the same. She bent to run her fingers through the turned soil. We could keep a few hens. Maybe a goat. If we had a pen. I can build it, he said. Boards will come dear, but I've been setting aside iron nails from the old shed. Should be enough. Marabeth looked up at him then. You're building something here, Yates. Not just fences and furrows. He didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the grass at their feet, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a hawk called once. I didn't think I'd ever have reason to build more, he said, voice low. Didn't see the point before. And now? He studied her face a long moment, then reached for her hand, his palm rough and warm. Now I see it clear. That night, after Delia had fallen asleep with her thumb still tucked under the edge of the quilt, Marabeth stepped out to check the coals in the ash pan. She found Yates on the porch bench, oiling the hinges of a small cedar box. She sat beside him, drawing her shawl close. You're working late. He nodded, turning the hinge with care. Found this in the loft. Needed fixing. What was it for? Hard to say. Could have held cartridges or letters. Might have belonged to the trapper who squatted here before me. He left in a hurry. Left most things behind. Marabeth traced the edge of the wood with her fingers. Funny how a box can hold more than what's put in it. Yates glanced at her. I suppose you're not just talking about cedar. No, she said softly. I've been carrying things too. Loss. Fear. The kind that doesn't show unless someone's close enough to see it. He set the box aside and turned toward her. I see it. She let the silence stretch, then leaned against his shoulder. I haven't let anyone see me in a long time. You don't have to hide here. The moon rose full, casting a wash of silver across the yard. They sat like that until the coals inside burned low and the night pressed soft around them. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Yates taught Delia to braid rope from creek grass. Marabeth stitched a curtain for the single window in the loft, saying nothing of how it made the cabin feel more like a home than a shelter. One morning, while gathering kindling near the slope, Marabeth found the remains of a rusted horseshoe half buried in the soil. She carried it back in her apron and set it by the door. For luck, she said, brushing dirt from her palms. Yates looked at it, then her. We've already got that, he said. She smiled, and this time she didn't look away. The last frost passed quietly, and with it came the steady work of spring. Yates pulled the plow by hand most days, the soil too soft in places for the mare to manage. Marabeth planted in neat rows behind him, her knees stained with earth and her hair bound back with a strip of muslin. Delia kept to the edge, gathering wild mustard greens and pressing them between pages of the schoolbook, saying she wanted to remember what the world looked like when it started over. One damp morning, as the clouds hung low and the air smelled of moss and turned loam, Yates entered the cabin with a folded paper in hand. "It's from the county office," he said, setting it on the table. The teacher left it before he rode out. Marabeth dried her hands on her apron and opened it. Her eyes moved down the page. "They're offering land parcels to settlers willing to stay on and improve it. Says here we qualify if we register before the end of spring." Yates watched her. "I never wrote to them. Didn't figure it mattered." "It does now," she said, voice quiet. "We could make it ours. Not just borrowed ground. Not just survival." He exhaled slowly. "You'd stay then. For good." She looked at him, steady. "I already have." That evening, once Delia had settled into her quilt with a book and her new slate, Marabeth and Yates stepped outside. The light was blue around the edges and the ridge beyond the creek was beginning to green. She took his hand without hesitation. "You said you built this place with your own hands," she said. "But it wasn't ready until we were here." He held her gaze. "It was waiting for you. I just didn't know it yet." They stood in silence for several minutes, the kind of quiet that held more than words. Then she turned toward him, her voice low. "I want to marry you, Yates." He didn't flinch. His hand tightened around hers. "I already live like I have," he said. "But I'll say it if you want it said. I want Delia to know her life isn't built on accidents," she said. "I want her to see that choosing someone, truly choosing them, means something." He nodded once. "Then we'll say it." They were married the following Sunday, just after mid-morning, with the teacher returned to witness and Delia standing between them, holding a sprig of dogwood in her fist. There was no preacher, only Yates's slow voice and Marabeth's clear one, and the quiet hush of the pines around them that seemed to lean in and listen. Afterward, they ate cornbread and honey by the stream while the teacher packed his bag. He left before dusk, promising to return by midsummer with new readers and a few slates for the homestead children nearby. That night, Marabeth lay beside Yates in the bed he'd built alone, now widened with time and shared purpose. The window was open and the scent of warm rain drifted in. She rested her head against his shoulder, her fingers tracing the shape of his palm. "You never asked me about before," she whispered. "About what I lost." "I didn't need to," he said. "You brought all that mattered with you." She closed her eyes. "So did you." Years passed in the way that good years do, quietly, steadily, with the kind of fullness that rarely calls attention to itself. They grew barley and potatoes, kept hens and a pair of goats. Delia learned to write in a straight hand and read aloud with a lilt that made Marabeth's heart ache with pride. By the time she was 12, she could shoot straighter than Yates and ride bareback to the creek's edge without slipping once. She called him Pa without ever being asked. Marabeth stitched a new quilt each winter from worn shirts and flour sacks, and every spring they planted a little more than the last. Yates built a second room on the cabin and then a porch that caught the afternoon sun. One evening, as the light stretched long across the fields and the wind carried the scent of lilacs from the bush Marabeth had coaxed into bloom, Yates brought out the cedar box he'd once repaired and set it in her lap. She opened it to find a folded paper, yellowed at the edges. "It's the claim deed," he said. "Filed and sealed." She took his hand. "So it's ours. All of it." He looked at her then, not with surprise or even joy, but with the calm certainty of a man who had waited a long time for a thing he already believed in. "It's always been," he said. They sat together on the porch as the sun slipped behind the ridge. The land around them hummed with quiet life, hens settling, the creek murmuring in its bed, the long breath of the earth easing into night. And side by side, with calloused hands and hearts mended by kindness, Yates and Marabeth Alder watched the world they'd built steady itself into something lasting, something whole, something that would hold.